It's now time for the Recovery Boys, Lewis Finch and Macon Moy, as they spend the next hour with you discussing the issues of alcoholism and drug addiction, as well as the road to recovery. Here's Lewis and Macon.
I'm Macon.
I'm Lewis.
And we're the Recovery
Boys.
Lewis?
Yes, sir.
Good morning. Beautiful
morning.
Beautiful morning here in Wellwind Executive Offices. Cooled off a little bit, finally.
Oh, yes.
Hopefully all those flies that are running around my house are now dead. I got tired of trying to kill them. So I do love this time of the year. And, you know, it's an interesting time of the, not only is it an interesting time, it's just an interesting place in history for us. The election is over. Results are probably not going to change, even though there's going to continue to be some noise about that. But 2020, you know, it's been a strange year. It has been just a strange year. And as you know, as we talked about a couple times this week, our business is it's just, we've never seen more people in need of counseling services.
Exactly.
We have record sales. And the alcohol sales, the record sales in the alcohol stores are minus most retail establishments being open, and of course we don't get the opportunity to hear from the drug dealers, but I'm sure they're having a good year too. The guys selling the stuff that you can't buy
I'm sure
illegally.
they're not hurting any of them.
Yeah. And so, how you doing, Lewis?
Doing great, man. Doing very well, very well. To your point, there's a lot of noise. A lot of noise out here, right?
Yeah.
Some of it good, but a lot of it not so good because people are figuring out where their loved ones have been doing over the last few years, right?
Yeah, that, you know what, that's exactly right. And I will tell you, we had a business meeting yesterday, a business club that Lewis is a part of and that I've been very, very privileged to be a part of for the last few months. And one of the things that we discussed yesterday, and it was not just specific to the club, but I think specific to our way of life, is older children coming back to the homes.
Yes.
You know,
yeah.
About all of a sudden, because there's not, the job market's different, people are being asked not to come to the offices anymore. So you're starting to see 20, even 30-year-old kids come back to roost in the home nest. And the amount of discomfort and issues that that's creating is pretty significant.
Yeah. Most parents don't expect their kids to come back and live with them at that age. In fact, if you're a parent, you want your kids to go and seek life outside of the home. That's part of what the deal is. It's well, we're seeing a lot more of it though. Actually, both even older kids are coming back home, right?
You know, and it's funny. I forget who it was. One of our guys yesterday read a quote saying that ultimately, what you want, the parents. Well, can't quite remember exactly how it was stated, but it was basically, you want kids who don't need parents, or parents who don't need kids.
Right.
That was just a kind of a strange thing. But one of the things we are going to talk about this morning is the relationship between parents and children in addiction, and children with parents in addiction, and that whole, how complicated that makes life. And we see it firsthand with the families that we deal with here. So we want to talk about that a little bit, but we also want to talk a little bit about 2021 and how people going about trying to prepare. I mean, just as a business unit here at Wellwind, we're currently trying to put a 2021 plan together, and we struggle with that because, quite honestly, we don't know what it's going to be like.
No, we have no clue. Our 2020 budget, such as it is, has blown up.
Well, I think historical data you can put it in the garbage can now, because we've never been through a historical period where, most of us anyway, we haven't participated in a pandemic, but we're seeing a disease affect everybody's business, not just their way of life, but every aspect of it. And so trying to come up with some kind of plan on something that you really can't plan around is a complicated thing for us.
I was thinking about this the other day. To some degree, I feel fortunate that I'm in recovery.
Yeah, well,
because it's prepared me to some degree for what we're going through right now.
Right. We have first-hand experience of having to not only live, but to prosper in crisis situations. You know, when we were in active addiction, we learned firsthand the consequences of active addiction and living in crisis. And so, you know, it seems like our entire world, at least in the United States, and I know it's all over the world, but just for us specifically, every day is a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Every day is a crisis. I mean, we have a governor here in the state of North Carolina and other governors that are getting ready to make new announcements and put new restrictions in place. There's this whole conversation about masks, you know, the proper use of masks, and you know, we still have, you know, half the population of the United States, well, not quite half, but I think somebody told me yesterday, interesting, you know, there were 76 million people who voted for Joe Biden, and there were 73 million people who voted for Donald Trump. And so, you know, when you think about, there's 73 million people, which is another fact that they also said was that's the most people that have ever voted against a president that won.
Right.
And so a president's never come into office with this many people who didn't want him to be president.
Yeah.
And so having these conversations about how everybody's gonna get along is just, you know, they're smoking something that we luckily quit smoking a long time ago. But it's gonna be an interesting 2 years while everybody kind of gathers their breath. But you know, this coronavirus has really affected the way we live. And we're in the business of helping people who struggle with living, and so our workload has increased tremendously because of this virus and because of all the hurdles and all of the, you know, the difficulties that is created. And you know, unfortunately, we have a society that likes to medicate itself, and so alcohol and drug use is through the roof, as well as mental illness is presenting in a much more aggressive manner.
Well, when you can't get out and commingle and get up with friends, it creates dynamics, as you and I both know.
It does. You know,
you can't see your friends, you can't see the people you're closest to, but only so. Like the Thanksgiving thing coming up. I mean,
I was thinking about that. You know, these families. This is always a time where, you know, families come together. Christmas, you know, holiday season, and now we heard at least 3 different families yesterday that are in the middle of huge arguments about who's going to go where.
Exactly.
Who gets the parents?
Right.
Who gets the grandparents? You know, where do the kids go? Is it okay? And you know, you're being told you can't have more than 10 people anywhere. It's just, you know, it's complicated, and what we try and create here at Wellwyn and in the counseling profession and the helping profession is ways to help people bridge those periods in their life. And this is the most significant period of disruption and issues that we don't control this.
Well, the irony in what we're doing is that you and I have talked about this for a long time, that the group setting is the best form of therapy.
Correct.
Because I've heard a term a long time ago called the therapeutic alliance, and the group can, when it comes together, is an incredible force. Well, you don't get the same mojo when a group meets on Zoom versus a group that meets in person.
You really
can't get it. It doesn't happen. It's a 2-dimensional versus 3-dimensional meeting.
There's no question about it. We also, you know, we discussed accountability. We discussed, you know, one of the things we've seen in group is that people struggle. Even in our group yesterday, in our business group, we actually talked about some personal issues that I don't think we would have ever discussed.
No,
ever discussed. And now all of a sudden, listen, one of the first things we want to make sure, and before we move into the parent conversation, is it is very healthy to express your feelings. It is extremely healthy. One of the biggest challenges that men have, or that people have in general, is to be honest with the people around them about what's really inside of them.
Yeah.
And so the reason that alcohol and drugs play such a major part is it allows you to make all those feelings go away.
Absolutely.
And
Yep.
you know, that numbing sensation that alcohol and drugs have, it just puts off issues that eventually will have to be, you're going to have discussions about them, you're going to have to fix them, you're going to have to address them.
Well, when you're not meeting in person, you can do other things on a Zoom call versus when you're in a room with somebody.
Well, and let's get into a conversation about kids.
Okay.
Because, you know, one of the things that strikes me is, and one of the things that we heard yesterday a lot was everything's being blamed on COVID. Well, business is off, that's the COVID. Everything is COVID, COVID, COVID. But one of the things that COVID has definitely created difficulty is in finding new jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Most companies are on hold because they're not sure how the rest of their, professional lives, I mean, the businesses themselves are not quite sure how they're going to survive this thing, or how do you right-size expenses? Do you have a, quote, pandemic strategy? Nobody's got a pandemic strategy. Hell, we don't. I guess we're fortunate we're in a business where people come when they're having problems. There seems to be more problems in the world these days than ever. But kids, so what do you do? If you're a parent and all of a sudden you have a 25 or 30-year-old kid who's been to school, ready to enter the job market, and all of a sudden there's no job market to enter, how do you address that?
Good question. I don't know specifically how you address it, but I think what we're seeing, and you and I have talked about this multiple times, by the time this hits, most parents are ill-equipped with the right techniques.
That's right.
They for whatever reason, I don't understand why. I went to school. I grew up in my here in Raleigh, as a matter of fact, and went to high school and went to college. And when I graduated, the expectation was for me to leave, to go. They didn't really care where, as long as I just left and pursued my career or whatever I was going to do. The expectation was not for me to come home. They were, as far as they were concerned, they had done their job, and it was my job from this point forward to go build my life.
Yeah, to grow up.
To grow up. Well, what we're seeing now is the exact opposite. Parents, a lot, and we're lumping everybody in there together, right? That's not the case. I mean, obviously there's some very good parents out there, but a good number of parents now, we're saying, in fact, to me, the problem is not the child, it's the parent.
Right. The thing that we understand most is the child, because especially, and we should back up a little bit and say specifically what we want to talk about are kids who are abusing alcohol and drugs while they're not growing up.
Correct.
So their full-time job is either electronic activation, they're stimulating their brains with games or social interaction or whatever, and they also are, they're up late, they don't have normal hours. Most parents, I would say, have a pretty standard day. Most kids don't.
Correct.
And so you're having those two it's a paradox, right? I mean, you have one household that's supporting two lifestyles, and
right.
It creates all kinds of conflict. And so what we wanted to talk about is what's the right way to handle that? We get hired here at Wellwind to do interventions. It's one of our services. And basically one of the things, and Lewis, you told me this when I first started coming and working with you a little bit, but one of the things that's obvious is that we understand the addict way better than we understand the parent.
Oh yeah.
I
can predict what the addict's going to do.
Yeah, the addict is the most predictable person in the equation. Now that seems counterintuitive, but we know what a drug addict or an alcoholic, we know what their habits are, we know what they typically do. I mean, it's not hard to figure out they're going to manipulate, lie, and they're going to continually put themselves in a position where they can further their drug use or alcohol use. The parents, on the other hand, we have no idea how to predict. Some parents completely back away and exert no influence or no consequences or no boundaries. We have some parents who become just the opposite. They think that they can love their kids straight. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about what we would consider to be best practices, at least. If you're a parent and you're dealing with an addicted child or even an addicted family member, maybe it's a brother, families are complex groups. What are some of the best practices? And let's talk about that, Lewis. Let's talk about the things that we try, because you know what? We get hired to help an addicted person get treatment, but we have to, the real client's the family, because they affect the outcome and the process way more than the drug addict does.
We know if that the addict and alcoholic is going to do what they're going to do.
Correct.
They're fairly predictable. If we can get the family moving in a direction that we believe is safe and where they should be, we feel confident that the person of concern, the addict alcoholic, will then begin moving that way too. Because in most cases, the family members are the ones who are helping them continue their lifestyles of drinking and doing drugs.
Yeah, we hear about it in AA, Al-Anon, all the various recovery fellowships. They're labeled enablers.
Yes.
What they do is they enable the lifestyle to continue. A lot, 9 times out of 10 for really good reasons. They love them. They don't want them to sleep in the woods. They're worried about them killing themselves. All kinds of issues. But what they sometimes fail to realize is they're just prolonging the problem. They're not addressing it.
And in reality, they really have no control over them anyway.
That's exactly
they
right.
try to exert control, but if they really could exert control, their loved one wouldn't be doing what they're doing.
Right.
So I don't know if I'm sure you've watched the show Intervention. It used to be on A&E.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I like that show so much is because it starts out as a huge mess. For the first 45, 50 minutes, it looks like a train wreck. And at the end, and by the way, while you're watching the show, you see the different family member characters in there. So you see every single show, you see the enabler.
Right.
You see the mother or the father, in some cases, who will drive their child to their drug dealer.
Yep.
Because they don't want them to, it's a bad part of town.
Yep.
Now, how stupid is that?
It
makes no sense at all. It's totally counterintuitive. In fact, if you were to present that to that parent from somebody else, they would say it's nuts.
Yep.
But that's the new normal.
Yeah, and let's face it, real-time decisions, sometimes you don't have the proper amount of time to make a good assessment and then make a proper decision. It's emotions. Emotions carry the day. And how many times have we told parents you can't love your kids straight? You can't. You can love them, but if you really love them, you would do just the opposite of what you're doing.
Right.
You let them go.
As a dad of two kids, I've got 2 as well. We've made all the mistakes. We see that. Going back in my past, looking at it, it's called cringeworthy. I feel like that education for me is invaluable because I can see the mistakes I've made. I have tried to adjust along the way, and I don't. Now that my 2 girls have grown, I don't serve up advice the way I used to.
Right.
Because if I haven't done my job at this point, I'm not going to be able to do my job, and they've got to figure it out, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I think back to the way I was raised. I had 4 brothers. Hardworking parents, sweet parents. God knows. We had an idyllic life, but there was never any conversation about staying.
No. Heck no.
It was obvious.
Or coming back.
Yeah. Once you're done, you're done.
Yeah.
And go, good luck.
Exactly.
And I talked to my mom. My dad passed away fairly early, but I talked to my mom. and my mom's passed away in 2012. And, it's still to this day, when something good happens or when something bad happens, my go-to was to pick up the phone and call my mom. I still have that urge sometimes, and I have to realize she's still, she's not here anymore. And so, there's certainly parents have roles with kids forever. But one of the things that I think we would preach, and we certainly probably didn't practice as much, is to be logical and try and make it a process, and quit trying to handle it straight off of emotion.
Well, and if you're a parent, you're not their friend. First and foremost, you're their parent. Your objective is to get them to a point where they can be self-sufficient.
That's right. Exactly right.
And I think a lot of us, from time to time, lose sight of that.
Yep.
I finally came to the realization, after battling with my daughters and during their teens, that I just wanted to get them to the age of 18. Once they were 18, they could make all the decisions they wanted to, if that's what they wanted to do, and I was off the hook. I think a lot of parents somehow think that they can alter reality, but I'm here to tell you, once your child turns 18, the game changes dramatically.
It does.
And if they're not prepared, they've got to learn it at some point. You need to help them figure it out sooner than later.
And I'll also say, one of the terms that we use in this business is codependency, and
oh, Lord.
we see that an awful lot. But I would also say to the parents, the more active you are in the early stages of their life, the harder it's going to be for you not to continue that same kind of behavior deep into their life.
Yes.
At some point you have to allow, and it's not just your child, just even in business, if we hire somebody and we basically explain the job to them, we don't go and do their job for them. We let them go and do their work, right? Well, it's kind of the same thing with a kid. I mean, you give them the rules, you give them the consequence conversation, but then you got to let them sink or swim.
Well, and we talked about this yesterday at the business meeting. I've never learned, well, I say never. I have learned very little from my successes. Right. I've learned everything from my failures.
Right, and I think that's such a good point. But also, it requires the parent, I think, to be honest about things. I think as a society tend to not want people to know the worst thing about our kids, and so we don't talk about that.
Well, we have expectations for our children.
We do, of course we do.
Which are probably ridiculous because they're going to do what they're going to do.
Right.
And for me to want for my children and then them not attain it and then me get upset about it is ridiculous. They're going to do what they're going to do, and I've got to love them for who they are. Once they become adults, my job's over.
That's right. The thing that we would hope that one of the things that we try and push, especially when we see families come into us and talk about their problems, is to develop a level of honest communication, so that whether people agree with it or not, everybody needs to put their cards on the table. That's the only way you can ever fix anything, is to understand the problem.
Correct. And you pointed this out to me. Particularly in recovery, the most important variable is honesty.
If the poison, especially for us in recovery, but the poison, I think for almost anybody, is the secret. A secret that you have to keep is poison. Right. Eventually it'll fester, and eventually it will present itself. And you can't hide things from the people that you love. At least you're not supposed to. If you really love them, you should let them see the best and the worst things about you.
Well, we discussed this yesterday too. I feel fortunate, I know you do, that we're in recovery because our lives are open books.
We don't have the luxury of secrets.
No, because it means death eventually for us.
That's right. Well, or we've, both of us in recovery, have built very, very nice lives that we love. We love our lives. Maybe it's not all the things that we thought we needed to be happy when we were in active addiction, but one of the things that active addiction and hitting the bottom and going into recovery, it teaches you what you really means, what you really care about, what you really don't care about. And it's amazing how easy it is to let those things that hurt you go once you understand that. But what we do have, I love my life in almost a desperate fashion. I'll do anything to protect my life. And when I say I'll do anything, that doesn't mean when I was in active addiction, I said I'd do anything to keep on getting high. That meant I had to lie, manipulate. Well, in recovery, those things are just the opposite.
Right.
You have to over communicate.
Right.
You have to bear, honesty. And sometimes that means saying things that you know are going to create some uncomfortable moments. That was the thing, one of the things we had this really cool little, what was it? I think that Jim called it interactive 45-minute period yesterday where we put I am from, and it really did give you a little chance to present yourself to everybody else in a very vulnerable fashion.
Yeah.
And I think that's my wife Taylor and I, we have conversations now, and they're not always superficial. They're about real things.
Right.
Because we do face challenges in recovery, and so especially there's a whole new segment of issues coming up with the coronavirus. Has created a new way of life, or is creating a new normal for our country. And a lot of that has people going back to the places that they want to be for safety or for some kind of a guaranteed lifestyle. And that a lot of times that brings kids back to their parents.
Correct.
When the parents it's not like the parents sent them a little invitation to come back.
Yeah.
And so one of the comments that we would want to make to the parents is maintain your boundaries. If you want to help your kids, there's nothing wrong with that. But don't all of a sudden start making decisions for them, because that just creates issues. If you have a child in active addiction, or if they're starting to present with complicated problems, get some professional help.
Very much so.
Have open conversations. Treat it the way you would treat it if it was somebody else. Just because it's your kid doesn't mean that it's that special. Everybody's going through this stuff. And so we have a lot of conversations with parents, and a lot of times, I got to be honest with you, Lewis, they do not want to hear what we got to say.
No. Because they've got a mindset that, first of all, this is what their child should be. And if their child isn't that way, how can they make their child that way?
Yeah.
Mold them. And
right.
It's interesting. I feel fortunate for a number of different reasons, because after my first wife passed away, I immediately stepped up to that new role of I was going to be super parent.
Yeah.
I did a horrible job of it, but every time they would open their mouths, I would try to solve the problem that came out of it. And if they ever took my advice, which was very rarely, these were 30-year-old women. If they ever took my advice, they would never really do what I thought they should do, and it would always fail, right? Or it wouldn't work out the way I thought it should work out. So I would get the blame for it, as opposed to them figuring it out on their own.
Right.
Now, if they asked me a pointed question, I should serve up an answer, or at least help them figure it out. But I was trying to solve all the problems, and we see this every single day. Parents who step in and try to do the thinking for their kids.
Yep.
It never works.
It does not. And one of the other things that I'm thinking about my situation specifically. So I disappointed my children. Their dad in active addiction, and I went straight down. I went right into the rabbit hole, to the deep hole. And so I really did. I disappointed them. I guess it's hard to not characterize it as abandonment, but that's basically what I did. I made my alcohol and my drug more important than my children.
Right.
God, it makes you cringe to say that, but that's just what happened.
Well, we both did.
We did, but so now you get into recovery, right? How do you reestablish that relationship with your kids?
Well, and the tendency is to go the opposite direction.
That's what, and I will tell you that that's the one thing that I feel like, and maybe it's because I didn't have any resources, so I couldn't start buying them things to make up for it, because I didn't have any money to buy things with. And so the only thing that I really had, and this is one of the great lessons from from AA and from some of the recovery information that I read about was what I was honest with them. And I went to them and I told them, I said, I'm so sorry. If I could fix it all, I would, but I really can't. But going forward, what I will tell you is I'll always be honest with you, and I'll do anything in the world. I love you, and I'll do anything in the world to support you. And support is a big word, but it doesn't mean that you give them things they don't need or you take away issues that they need to learn how to deal with on their own. Exactly. The greatest thing you can do as a parent is support them. As you always say, that's horrible, honey. What are you going to do about that? We don't want to fix our kids' problems, but we do want to tell them that we support them and that we trust them and that we know the decisions they're getting ready to make are the best decisions. All we ask is about process, right? I mean, that's the thing that we teach here, or the thing that we try, and when we consult with parents, is we try and turn it into a process. People seem to be comfortable with that word process. Right. It gives them some start and end to something that for most of these parents that are dealing with it, it seems like it's never going to end. Correct. And so a process allows them to feel like they are at least understanding what's going on. And, we've had some success. God knows we've had some failure. But the one thing that we have always tried to do for all the clients and for our lives personally is to at least give them our best advice based on our personal situation and based on what the industry has taught us. So virtually every time we have parents specifically, forget about spouses for a second, we have parents specifically who we work with, the stories that they tell us are horrific. And if those same parents were to have that story served up to them by somebody else, right, they would think it's horrific. I know. But because it's happening to them in real time, they just don't see it. Right. And so one of the things that we do, I think, successfully is to have them describe the situation, walk them through the process to show them just how ridiculous their lives have become. Right. And these are usually very successful professionals in a lot of cases. Certainly people who are, old enough to have 20 and 30-year-olds that they suddenly find themselves trapped in this horrible situation where they've got this person who's now either they're dependent on or the person's dependent on them. That's right, exactly right. And what do? And they can't see the forest for the trees. They can't, and that's the most important thing I think. And we talk about this I think on every one of these podcasts, but real information based on facts, based on real world experience is one of the things that we offer people. Said, look, we're not the smartest people, but we know what we know, and we can usually look at a situation and with a high degree of comfort, we can predict that if you don't do this, this is going to happen. If you'll do this, this is going to happen. Right. And I think that some information with a high degree of being able to allow them to get their arms around their situation. How many times have we heard people, the thing that comes out on the phone calls and also in person is, I just don't know what to do. Right. I just don't know what to do. And so what we try to do they say everything I've tried hasn't worked. Right. Well, the problem is they haven't tried everything. That's the great thing about our whiteboard here is we'll usually write it down and then we'll all look at it and say, okay, let's kind of pick this apart and talk about as a project or as a process. Let's talk about the things that are working, the things that aren't working. And so that's the thing. I think that we have more parents today dealing with this sudden movement back to the house. Kids are bringing their habits with them. Another issue that we're both having to kind of get up to speed on is the impact on the brain. And let's face it, all these addictions, these are brain diseases. Becoming addicted to an electronic device for your stimulation, that's a real problem. It's a drug. So. It's a drug. It's just not one you put in your mouth. It's one that your eyes process. And if you don't get that stimulation, you feel depressed, or it's amazing. And so we're starting to see treatment centers, inpatient actually, that specialize in this electronic addiction. And only that addiction. Technology addictions. Right. Which is
think about where we've come. I mean, we started out with when I was in college back in the Stone Age, computers were just coming up. Who would have predicted that you would have an addiction to something that should improve your life like that?
I know. It's funny. I was thinking about how even as a 63-year-old, somewhat technology challenged man, if I hear my phone ring and I don't answer it, I have anxiety about what I just missed.
Yep.
How crazy is that?
Yeah.
How crazy is that? I am my entire life, my emotions that can be affected, not controlled yet, but certainly affected or impacted by outside things that you have no. I mean, there's no way to cover yourself for them. My phone rings, or if I hear the little bell, and I got an email. It's like, if I don't respond to that right away. I was thinking back when I first got in the radio business, the cell phone was kind of a new contraption. As a matter of fact, I remember my boss, we were at the U.S. Open in Brookline, Massachusetts. I was an alternate to play in that particular tournament. And so I was there with the guys that I'd eventually go to work with. And I remember they had that bag phone.
Right.
And how unique it was that the office, you could actually deal with an issue that was at the office instead of having to deal with it tomorrow when you came in and found out about it.
From time to time, I wonder how I got along without it. I mean, when I first started working, there were no cell phones.
Oh, no.
And I would go home and actually have a life.
Yep.
Now I go home and I'm still at work virtually all the time.
Well, that's I think everybody's. And the term that we hear, and I hear professionals starting to talk about it, and I'm determined to learn as much about it as I can, because we're going to end up dealing with it forever now. It's a new thing. It's not going to go away. It's not going to become less popular. It's just going to get more complicated. But they call it screen time.
Right.
And screen time impacts your quality of life.
Mm-hmm.
It just does. And so we'll start to develop formulas and strategies on how do you effectively turn that screen off and go back to going outside and planting stuff with your hands. My wife, she loves gardening and she loves outdoor stuff. And so it's nice if we go for a walk or we go somewhere, we just don't take our phones with us.
Well, in our field, you hear a lot of the therapists talk about self-care.
Yeah.
Which most people, I don't know. A lot of people practice it. A lot of people don't. And I think that's a lot of times what we are seeing are people who are simply not able to, or they're not aware of the fact that they're not practicing self-care.
That's exactly
parents particularly. As volatile as my situation was with my mother growing up, my mother had several diversions in her life. She wasn't totally beholden to me and my brother, my sister, or my dad. She had many hobbies. She did multiple things, and I think that it helped create in her at least a sense of normalcy in her mind.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of us that just don't have that.
Well, I marvel at the amount of noise in everybody's life these days. The amount of noise that you don't control. I mean, I'm talking about the social media platforms alone, trying to understand all the little symbols and, the timing issues. One of the things that we definitely know is that some people, if they send out a tweet or they put something on their Facebook page and they don't get immediate feedback, they take that as a denial or a criticism. It never occurred to somebody, but maybe nobody's looking at it.
Right.
Maybe they haven't seen it yet,
Mm-hmm.
And so these are all the challenges I think that parents need to be aware of these days with their children.
Recently, I was just thinking about this. Recently, we were dealing with a family of a young lady, and to really, this was way over the top, but this young lady was into anime. Is that what you pronounce it?
I guess.
And then also
it's an alternate universe, right?
Right. You're a character basically.
Right.
And also Pokemon of all things
Yeah.
as a 20-something-year-old, and how you get down that path. She'd never had a job, or she'd had jobs but had never been successful at them, and she had virtually no future in front of her.
Yeah.
Because mom and dad kept propping her up.
I know.
And you go, well, the parents would go, what's she's going to do? Well, she'll figure it out.
Well, or she won't.
Or she won't. But that's her.
One of the absolutes in life is that the parents are going to die, and the kid's going to be on this earth without her parents and without all the things that parents think that she has to have. She's going to have to figure that stuff out herself. She's going to have to do it sooner or later.
Well, it's interesting to me that parents will come to us, and their child will be into heroin or meth, and they'll say that their child can't survive unless they're interjecting themselves in their lives. And I will point out to them, I will say to them, do you know where to go buy heroin? And they'll go, of course not. Well, I go, well, neither do I. And I actually run a treatment center. They know where to buy heroin.
Absolutely.
I'll bet you money they can figure out where to sleep and where to find food.
That's right.
So it's not that they're not resourceful. In fact, they're probably incredibly resourceful.
Right.
They just haven't had to do the things that most of us have had to do.
You know, one of the things that I learned in treatment, one of the things that we try and teach or we suggest in our therapies is that use the things that you're good at for good, not for bad.
Right.
I mean,
right.
There's nothing wrong with being creative and having a very outgoing personality, having the ability to communicate in a very effective way. Just do it for good instead of for your own demise. And a lot of times I think when we go through the assets, it's like any other business. So let's talk about the good things and the bad things and the things we need to work on. And I think that's I want to swing back around to this whole conversation for the parents. There's a process that you need to introduce if you want to work on these issues that we're starting to see pop up more and more and more.
Right.
And the process is not complicated, but it needs to be organized, and there needs to be there needs to be the main piece of the platform that has got to exist is honesty. You cannot be afraid to say something because of how it's going to impact somebody. And that's the whole thing is that it's like cleaning something up. You got to get it completely clean. You can't kind of clean it. You got to clean it completely. And so that honesty piece is one of the first things that we always bring up when we have these conversations is say, listen, we're not here to judge you, but we need to know everything. Please don't not tell something because you're embarrassed or because you're worried about how we're going to feel about it. We can only help if we understand what the problem is.
And we do. I've specifically talked to a number of parents, and you do too, that have lost children.
It's heartbreaking.
And they never talk about the stuff they did. They talk about the stuff they didn't do.
That's right.
What did I miss? What did I not do? What they don't do is really what they should have done, which is simply let their child live or die, because that happens too, on their own merits.
That's exactly right. We talk about it all the time, Lewis. Introduce them to the world of consequences because that's the reality of the situation is every time you do something, there'll be a consequence for it. And as long as you understand that and you accept responsibility for the consequence, then have at it. Have at it. How
many people come to us whose parents they'll end up in jail doing whatever they do, end up in jail, and mom and dad will bail them out.
Yeah.
And all that does is it tells that person that somebody has their back, so that there's somebody else who's responsible now for their behavior, as opposed to letting them stay in jail and to just think about what they've done.
Well, and also to realize, okay, the only way you can ever learn anything is to experience the consequence completely. And so jail's the consequence of doing something that you're not supposed to be doing. If you shorten the consequence, then it doesn't have the same message or the same lesson.
Well, to me, the message is, look, I got away with it.
Exactly right.
And then all it does is embolden you. And if you're an addict or alcoholic, all it does is embolden you to say, well, look, I got away with it now. I can get away with it all the time.
Right. And listen, one of the things for sure is that every case is different. Every family's different. Every person is different. But there are some sameness to these problems that we're talking about. That's the reason that we understand them, is because we see them over and over and over again, and the lessons are always the same.
Well, and the patterns are the same.
Absolutely.
If we would be out of work if parents would simply be parents as opposed to being their friend.
That's right. Exactly right. And I'm telling you, it's hard to watch your kid fail, but it's the only way they're ever going to learn anything.
But again, if you apply the same lessons you did when they were first growing up, when a child tries to walk, they will fall down multiple times, hundreds of times. But that's the way they learn to walk.
That's right.
Same way they learn to talk, same way they learn to read. And every time your kid falls down, you pick them up, they'll never learn to walk. It's the exact same way in this business. And in the adult parenting issue, they have got to let them grow up and fall down and pick themselves back up again. That's the learning is in the process of growing up.
Yeah, that's the truth. And so what we want to say to the parents this morning is that if you need some help, reach out to a professional. We'd love it. Here at Wellwind, we deal with families every week, so we certainly we're prepared for that conversation if you find yourself in need of it. But at the very least, understand, recognize the problem, and start a process to address it.
Right.
And you can reach out to us here at Wellwind. My email address is mmoy@wellwind.com. We'll get Terry to make sure and put those addresses on the bottom of the screen. Lewis is lfinch@wellwind.com. You can go online and go to wellwind.com and read about or learn about our services. You can still pick up this podcast at therecoveryboys.com.
TheRecoveryBoys.com.
The Recovery Boys.
I still can't believe that was available, by the way.
I know. I think that's one of those God things. And we hope everybody figures this COVID lifestyle out, because we haven't.
No.
We haven't. And we're challenged. As a matter of fact, when we get off the podcast, Lewis and I have a conversation about how it continues to impact our business, because it just does. And anybody who says that COVID's not impacting their lives is just not being honest about it. And so we appreciate you watching us this week. We look forward to seeing you again next week. And we are
the Recovery Boys.
We are the Recovery Boys.
This is Macon. I'm Lewis.
And we're the Recovery Boys.
You've been listening to The Recovery Boys. Visit the Recovery Boys website at therecoveryboys.com. We thank you for listening to The Recovery Boys.